Thank you for tuning in to the Practical Preservation Podcast. Please take a moment to visit our website, practicalpreservationservices.com, for additional information and tips to help you restore your historical home. If you've not done so, please subscribe to us on iTunes, Stitcher, or SoundCloud, and also like us on Facebook. Welcome to the Practical Preservation Podcast, hosted by Danielle and Jonathan Kepperling. Kepperling Preservation Services is a family-owned business based in Lancaster, Pennsylvania, dedicated to the preservation of our built architectural history for today's use as well as future generations. Our weekly podcast provides you with expert advice specific to the unique needs of renovating a historic home, educating by sharing our From the Trenches preservation knowledge and our guests' expertise, balancing modern needs while maintaining the historical significance, character, and beauty of your period home.
Today on the Practical Preservation Podcast, we have Kevin Miller from Auditors LLC. Kevin, thank you for joining me today.
Yeah, thank you.
So tell me a little bit about your background.
So my career path was anything but traditional. In high school, I did reasonably well academically, but for various reasons, had no idea what I wanted to do. But the expectation was that I would move into college or go to college, and so I did that again with no real plan. I ended up switching majors 3 times. I went from music education to business to civil engineering, with very little overlap in terms of the
Right.
type of study. So after about, I guess, 5 years of college and not being particularly close to a civil engineering degree, I decided I should probably take a break. I had a professor, I wish I knew his name, but I had a professor of civil engineering at Calvin College in Grand Rapids, Michigan. I went to him and I asked him if he thought I was cut out for civil engineering. And he said to me, he said, "Kevin, I have no doubt about your ability, but I don't think your heart's in it." And
Right.
it was really helpful to me to kind of feel like, okay, maybe I need to move on and just start working and see how things go. I did then take an internship with a civil engineering company, and I worked for them for 3 years then. I thought it might kind of reignite my interest in finishing the civil engineering degree, but it had the opposite effect. I hated it.
One of my best friends is a civil engineer, and she does stormwater management all day, and I can't imagine. So I totally understand.
It was way too much sitting in an office for me. So I eventually, left that again after 3 years. It was a good experience. I learned a lot, how to work with CAD programs, how to read plans. And so, as I went through these various jobs that I had, every single one of them, I can kind of point to ways that they helped prepare me for what I do today.
Right.
But sometimes you can only see that looking back. You don't see it at the time. However, I eventually got into remodeling and restoration. I did remodeling for about 10 years. I owned a company with my brother, and then for a time I owned it by myself. That also led to some burnout because I realized eventually that I don't like project management.
Right.
Which is, if you're going to own a remodeling company,
It's important.
I'm sure you can understand the need for that.
Yes.
But working, so for several of those years, my primary responsibility was estimating and sales. And it helped me to learn the industry, but I started to realize that while I worked for the restoration company, we did estimates for buildings that were destroyed by fires,
Right.
wind, water, mold damage. I started to realize I really did not care what color you wanted on your bathroom wall.
Right.
But I did find myself being curious why some bathroom walls were getting mold and why there were, different problems
Right.
that you would see in some houses and not in others. So it sort of sparked an interest in what we call building science. And I started, finding different resources. There's a great website called buildingscience.com that has lots of very technical information. I went to various conferences that, would have training, and I always seemed to gravitate towards the training that was related to building science. And so that kind of started to lay the foundation for what I do now.
Yeah. I think we're almost to 90 podcasts, and it's amazing to me how many people kind of take a kind of windy path to get to where they are now. I think that the idea that most people, go at 18, know exactly what they want to do and do it is kind of a myth.
Yeah.
Yes. So tell me, what brought you into the energy auditing side of things?
So it's an interesting question, because I originally, while I worked for the restoration company, and they trained me on the protocols and standards for testing mold and for kind of looking at diagnosing problems with moisture and mold, writing scopes in terms of how to remediate mold. So I got experience in that area while working for a restoration company. And so I thought, well, let me backtrack. During this time, during the spring and fall, I started getting a cough that just would not go away. It would last for a couple of months or longer.
Right.
And it seemed to be seasonal, and it seemed to come back every year. And eventually we discovered that we had mold in our basement behind some things where we didn't see it or didn't know about it. And the mold was triggering a respiratory distress, or, a cough that would last a long time. The irony, of course, was that I was a trained mold remediation specialist, but if you don't know you have it, you
right.
don't know what to do. So once we discovered the mold and remediated the mold, those health issues cleared up for me. So that kind of gave me a passion to look into dealing with mold problems and how to help people with those household or building problems. But I kind of thought I was going to start a business just dealing with mold, but eventually concluded that maybe that was a little bit too narrow of a focus for just trying to have a startup. So then there was a little bit of a funny story. You asked, the question was, why did I get into energy auditing? While I was working for the restoration company, I tried to call the owner of a business called Energy Smart Home Improvement. I was going to get a quote from him for some insulation on a project. I accidentally dialed the former owner of Energy Auditors.
Oh.
So while I was on the phone with him, he said to me, his name was Stan. He says, "I think we met one time. Didn't we meet at he named some pizza shop in Mechanicsburg?" And I'm thinking, yeah, I think you're right. I think we did meet, because we got to chatting. I chat with anyone that I run into, and we got to chatting, and so he thought we should get together for coffee since we had met before. So I said, all right, let's get together for coffee. During that meeting, he indicated that he was kind of looking to retire and get out, and wondered, was looking for someone actively to buy his business.
Right.
And so I realized that the principles involved with doing an energy audit, the building science, is comprised of the same principles that you use for diagnosing moisture and mold problems. It's all the physics of how houses work.
Right.
And so I realized it could be a good platform for starting a company that would eventually be able to work with energy efficiency, comfort, moisture problems, mold, kind of the whole gamut of building science related.
Yeah. And I think I agree with you. I think that really, they're very interconnected, but I think that one of the issues that I see with more modern building is that people aren't trained to look at like the whole house as a system. So they just like look at their own little section and figure, if it's leaking, it must be the roof, or, like they don't look at like the whole house. I don't know if you've encountered that also.
Yeah, very much so.
Yeah.
I mean, with a house, for instance, one of the reasons we now seal up the door between the garage and the house isn't directly related to energy. It's because oftentimes there's nasty things in a garage, whether someone has a car, they open the garage door and they start the car, to warm it up in the winter, or you just have cans of gas out there or weed killer or whatever. There can be some chemicals and toxins in a garage, and houses tend to be depressurized. The way we remember it is that houses suck. So they tend to be depressurized. The reason for this is when you turn on a bathroom vent, or you turn on a dryer, or any of these things that exhaust to the exterior, that's pushing air out of the envelope. Well, nature abhors a vacuum, so that has to be replaced, and so the house is going to draw air in.
Right.
If you allow air to be drawn in from a garage or from other places that have unhealthy things, toxins and chemicals in them, well, now you're breathing that in your house, and so that's undesirable.
So tell me about the services that Energy Auditors LLC offers.
So my vision when I started this was to grow to be a company that helps people solve problems with buildings. Basically just the science of how the houses work, to repeat myself a little bit. So along those lines, we do energy audits, which is we come in and we test the house and inspect the house thoroughly for anything that affects your energy performance of the home. We do a blower door test, which involves depressurizing the house to a certain pressure, and that allows us to measure how leaky your house is. We do, with the energy audit, we'll do some thermal imaging, which allows us to see maybe air leaking into the house or other problems that wouldn't be obvious to the naked eye. And with the energy audit, we give a full report with recommendations of improvements, and also photos and labeled photos that help you to make sense of the report. I always tell people, if they have questions after receiving the report, just give me a call and we can talk through it.
Right.
Because some of the concepts, we try to put them in simple language, but some of the concepts might not be, people might not be as familiar with them. Yeah. But in addition to the energy audits, we do mold and moisture investigations or inspections. some of that is, so mold is first and foremost a moisture problem.
Right.
Mold spores are present everywhere on Earth. If you took a cubic meter of air outside, it can range from 4,000 mold spores per cubic meter to, during certain seasons, it might be 60,000 mold spores per, but so I guess the point being, mold spores are everywhere.
Right.
And mold feeds on biological material or organic material. And we build our houses out of wood and organic materials, drywall with paper facing and so on. So the only thing then that you need, you have the mold spores, you have the food. And I joke that we make our houses out of mold food these days. All you need is moisture then to start to
activate it, right?
Activate it, yeah. So controlling moisture and also identifying the moisture problem that has resulted in a mold issue is key. We always say, if you don't resolve the underlying moisture problem, the mold will grow back. Right. Yeah. So that really is key to figuring out why you're getting mold. We also do mold testing. Some people, if they're not sure visually if they have mold, we can come out and do what's called spore trap testing, where we draw air through a little cassette, it's called, and we send that to a lab, and then they're able to identify, how much mold you have, but also the species. There are certain molds that are considered that are correlated with water damaged buildings or moisture problems in buildings. Penicillium, cladosporium, there's different ones. And so when you see those on an indoor mold sample, but did not have that in we always take an outdoor sample to see what molds are just present locally at the time. Right. When you see a bunch of penicillium or aspergillus or one of these indoor or commonly indoor molds, and you're not seeing that on the outdoor sample, that's a good indication that this mold is originating in that building. We also do some of this is more for new construction, but can have crossover with existing homes. We do duct leakage testing for HVAC systems. Right. We can work with HVAC sizing. HVAC systems are often very much oversized, right? Particularly in new construction. The codes have changed the efficiency of new construction so much, and yet the HVAC professionals have been a little hesitant to change too quickly. And I get it. Yeah. They say, well, we've done it this way for years and it works, so why change? Right.
Now, I had a question about the duct leakage testing. Would you recommend that if somebody was having their furnace replaced or their heat source replaced?
It depends. If they're having significant comfort issues and they think that duct leakage could be to blame, certainly we can come in and test. Depending on the construction of the house, sometimes you're limited in how much of that leakage you can eliminate.
Oh, that makes sense. Yeah.
So for instance, in an unfinished basement, you likely can seal things up pretty well. If it's an older house and they're using wall cavities for ducts, which was commonly done, right? Those areas you're unlikely to be able to do.
Yeah, you can't access them. Yeah, that's how our house was built in the 1920s, and we have forced air, and yeah, it's just in the walls. So yeah, that makes sense that you couldn't really without tearing everything apart, really seal those up.
Well, there is a technology called AeroSeal where they aerosolize a silicone product, I believe. I have a relatively rough knowledge of how it works, but they aerosolize a coagulant in essence, and so as that silicone is exiting holes, it coagulates and starts to fill them. That would be a question for, a company that works with the
Right.
AeroSeal in terms of what the expectations would
If
be.
you could like do a lining.
Yeah, in an older house, yeah. But
yeah, that's interesting.
the other two things we do a lot of is HERS ratings for new homes. A HERS rating kind of it gives a score for the overall efficiency of a home, and you can think of it as kind of a miles per gallon for a home. The rating starts at 0, so a HERS rating of 0 would mean that the home produces as much energy as it consumes, and from there it can go. Most existing homes are probably in the 130 range. Many new homes that we're seeing built today are getting scores of between 50 and 65.
Okay.
Some a little lower, but so the trend has definitely been towards improvement in the efficiency of new homes.
Right.
And then finally, we also do Energy Star certification for new homes. That's not something that's easy to do unless your builder is already certified for doing Energy Star homes. But
are there like tax benefits for that? Is that why people pursue that?
There can be.
Okay.
There's a federal tax credit of $2,000 if you hit certain targets. However, I haven't dealt with that yet. I believe that tax credit is for builders to encourage the builders
to do better. Yeah.
Do better, which the homeowners are always disappointed, but the incentive structure makes sense, because if a builder builds 100 homes a year and you can get them to build more efficiency, that's going to have more impact overall than one homeowner who's really concerned about it.
Yeah, that's very, very true. So, and that kind of leads me into my next question. Are there rebates available for energy audits?
So there are both PP&L and MET-Ed, the two electric companies that are most common in central PA, Pennsylvania. They both have good energy audit rebate programs. They're structured a little differently, and it's difficult to say exactly what the rebates will be moving forward. In the past, PP&L had a rebate of, it varied from $125 to $250 that reduced the homeowner's cost of an audit. Our audits, it's hard to say exactly what they cost. We typically shoot for $450 on an audit. However, the homeowner almost never pays anywhere close to that. And the reason I say it's difficult to say exactly what we charge is because, for instance, MET-Ed has incentives that they, if we install certain energy efficient items like light bulbs and so on, they reimburse us for those.
Oh yeah.
So we get some of our payment through the reimbursement as opposed to from the homeowner. Typically, I would say a homeowner is going to pay between $100 and $200 out of pocket for an energy audit from energy auditors. However, it's usually closer to the 100 or 150.
That's very reasonable.
Out of pocket. We're typically on site. If we have 2 people, we might be on site for 2.5 to 3 hours, and then we have the report to follow up. So there's quite a bit that goes into it.
Right.
But I agree. I think it's a good investment.
Yeah, we do maintenance audits, which kind of just look at like overall like what you need to do to maintain a house, and that's about like I'm on site usually 2 or 3 hours, and then I have to go back and write the report. So
Sure.
yeah.
Sure. And I mentioned that it's a little difficult to say what the rebates will be moving forward. Pennsylvania had an Act 129 that was passed, I believe, in 2008, and it was designed to help consumers, but particularly the electric utilities in Pennsylvania. It was to help them or coerce them to reduce energy consumption, and peak electric demand. And so that's governed by the Pennsylvania Public Utility Commission. June 1st of 2021 is actually the beginning of phase 4 of the Act 129 incentives. And currently the electric companies have proposed their new audit programs or their phase 4 audit programs to the Pennsylvania Public Utility Commission, and we still have not heard what the status is in terms of whether they've been approved. It's expected they'll be approved, and I had a conversation with one of the program managers, and he indicated that the audit rebates might actually improve or be more.
Oh, that's great.
After June 1st, at least for one of those 2 companies, which I'll keep anonymous for now because it's not public knowledge. But
right.
So it likely will improve for at least one of those companies. The other one, I don't have any insider knowledge there, but I expect them to continue to be very good rebate programs moving forward.
Yeah, very, very good. Talk to me a little bit about the importance of hiring an independent energy auditor. I know a lot of companies will say that they offer free audits, but that isn't necessarily a good thing for the consumer.
Sure. So our model at Energy Auditors is that of testing and consulting. We don't sell anything, and we don't do the actual improvements. We do offer some suggestions or referrals to homeowners if we recommend that you get more insulation. We have some companies that we can recommend that we know to be good ethical companies to deal with,
right.
HVAC companies, those sorts of things. But by not selling anything, we can then offer unbiased suggestions to a homeowner. I often tell people they can likely find a cheaper energy audit or one that is supposedly free, but there are always strings attached. So if a window company is offering free audits, surprise, surprise, they're going to find out that you need new windows, and so on. So there's also some HVAC companies, some weatherization companies. Those are companies that do insulating and air sealing. But yeah, they're always going to recommend their product because they're using that audit as a paid lead, essentially.
Right.
It's they get a little money from the utility company, and so it's a paid lead to try to push their product.
Right. Yeah.
So.
No, I definitely, you're not the first energy auditor that I heard to say that. And the first time I heard it, I thought that's really smart, because it is true. You know, if somebody's just offering their product as a solution, then how, you know, it's probably not unbiased.
Yeah, that's not to say that they are giving bad information every time.
Right.
You know, that's not what I'm trying to say. It just, it's just a different business model.
Yeah. No, but I think if you're really concerned about the energy efficiency of your house, you want to have somebody that's going to tell you all of the things that you could do, rather than just you know, this our solution will find this, you know, like
Sure.
we will find the solution to the problem.
Yep.
Yeah. So tell me a little bit about the mistakes that people make when they're trying to increase energy efficiency in an existing home.
So number one would be spending money on the wrong things. People frequently replace all or some of the windows or doors in their homes, replace an HVAC system, thinking, you know, they'll replace the windows in their home, and sometimes they are given wild promises in terms of what to expect.
Oh my goodness, yes.
With you know, you're gonna lower your energy bill by 30% if you replace your windows. The only person that will tell you that is a window salesman.
Right.
Or they'll say that this will pay for itself or whatever. The reality is, if you take out an older double or double pane, that's 2 panes of glasses or glass. Bifocals, 2 panes of glass. You take out an older wooden frame, say Anderson window, it might have an R value of 1, right? R value being the level of insulation. To put that into context, current codes require most walls to be insulated to about R21.
Right.
So you have a window that's about R1. If you put in a new window or a bunch of new windows, they typically have an R value, an insulation value of somewhere around 3.
Right. So you're not gaining that much.
You've increased a tiny bit, but not an amount that it's still essentially a hole in your wall.
Right. Right.
So, and typically, when you look at how much it's going to improve your performance, it's not terribly significant.
Right. Yeah. And it takes years and years to get to the costs, the energy savings versus the cost of a replacement window.
So for instance, you might spend $15, $20, $30 or more $1,000 on replacing your windows. I mean, how much is your electric bill? $200-$300?
Yeah.
The study I saw that looked at, you know, your return on investment for windows, your average window has a return on investment of 50 to 300 years down the road.
That's what I've seen also. Yeah.
So the window will be needing replaced again long before it's going to pay for itself through energy savings. Right. Go ahead.
I was just going to say, they're just hoping you don't live there long enough and the next person has to replace them.
Yeah, perhaps. There are reasons to replace windows and doors. Maybe they don't function well. They're hard to clean. They're ugly. They get condensation, which bothers you, or so there can be reasons, but typically you're never going to have an energy auditor recommend replacement of windows unless you have really old single pane wood windows or something along those lines.
Yeah, and there are engineering studies that in the preservation community that I know the University of Colorado has done some, and so has the University of Vermont, where a single, like an original window with a good storm window and weather strip, performs as well as a new window. So, there are if you just have a single pane with no weather strip and no storm window, that I'm sure that's pretty miserable.
Yep. So other mistakes, remodeling first and worrying about home performance later.
Oh yeah.
That gets it backwards, because many of the improvements you can make on an existing home, you have an opportunity, especially if you're doing a major remodel or restoration, you have an opportunity to get access to things like ductwork,
Right.
insulation, air sealing details that you don't have when the house is all buttoned up. So that would be a common mistake.
Yeah.
Number 3, I would say, is just blowing insulation in without air sealing a house. Insulation and air sealing are 2 major concerns when trying to improve energy efficiency. And they deal with different things. So you have heat moves in 3 different ways. You have conduction, convection, and radiant heat transfer. Conduction is like a pan sitting on a stove. It's a hot thing touching a cold thing. And the heat, the energy always goes from low to high, or sorry, high to low.
Right.
Got that backwards. So convection is heat that's being moved either through water or through air. And so with insulation deals with conduction. That's the warm thing touching the cold thing. This is why insulation has to be touching the surface it's trying to insulate. You have to have the insulation touching the drywall, or the insulation, a common one we see where this is funny or done poorly is an attic access hatch. In new construction, they have just a piece of drywall that you push out of the way to get into your attic. And they typically lay a piece of insulation across the framing. So that insulation is usually about 10 to 12 inches away from that piece of drywall. And I joke that's like being near a sweater. It does nothing. And insulation details do matter. When you do heat loss calculations, if you have a ceiling insulated to R38 and 1% of that ceiling is R1, so just a piece of drywall.
Right.
If 1% is R1 and the rest is R38, that whole system will only perform as though it's R27. So you lose, I don't know what that is, 25 to 30%
right.
Of your efficiency just by having 1% that's poorly detailed. So insulation deals with conduction. Air sealing is dealing with convection. So in a house, you get what's called the stack effect. Right. And the stack effect, if you think of a chimney, you heat air and it rises. Same thing happens in a house. As you heat air or heat condition the space, that air is going to rise, and it's just going to try and find anywhere it can to escape the house, because it builds up pressure up high in the house. And so, if you have an attic hatch that's not well sealed, if you have light fixtures that aren't sealed where they penetrate the ceiling, air can go through the light switch boxes and follow the wires where they drilled through the framing and get into the attic that way. So air sealing is dealing with that convection. So you really need to do both. One example I've heard is if you're outside on say you're at a lake and you're standing out on a dock and it's kind of raw and cold and windy, do you want a fluffy sweater? That's your insulation, or do you want a windbreak or a windbreaker? If you had to pick one, just the windbreaker, just the air sealing would do more,
Right.
right? But ideally, you have a windbreaker over top a sweater, and that works best together. So, having both. And then lastly, in terms of mistakes, tightening a house without controlling for moisture.
Yeah. I see that a lot.
Yeah, when you tighten up a house, you're limiting its ability to dry out naturally. And so even though a tight house is more comfortable, it's less drafty, it's more efficient, it also is more prone to moisture problems, or more more susceptible.
Right.
So you might have to run a dehumidifier in a basement, or have a whole house dehumidifier or something like that. Bring in fresh air ventilation, but the improvements in comfort and efficiency that come with a tight house far outweigh the penalties of maybe having to run a dehumidifier or ventilation. So
you just have to accommodate for that, or you will cause more problems.
yeah, for sure.
So what do you see as a challenge or a trend in home performance?
So obviously the trend is towards building more efficient homes and trying to improve the efficiency of existing homes. This is good because, in one sense, because more efficient homes, when maintained properly, are also more comfortable and healthier, as I mentioned. One real challenge is it drives up costs. I've often said that strict codes really hurt people of limited finances the most, because the family that's kind of struggling to get by, but maybe they have maybe they need more space and they want to add a room to their house. Well, really strict codes drive up the cost of that improvement or that addition a lot. So there's trade-offs there. The people who write the energy codes make no secret about the fact that they're trying to push for net zero new homes. So that means that the home produces as much electricity through solar, that sort of thing, as what it consumes. The concern is that's going to make houses almost unaffordable for anyone. At least you're either going to have a tiny home to achieve that, or you're not going to be able to afford it because you're building thicker walls, you're building, takes more lumber, you have much more expensive windows, solar isn't cheap. So there's definitely some challenges and trade-offs there. But I think the market tends to be good at coming up with solutions. So hopefully that'll continue to
and hopefully as the technology gets better, that usually and then demand goes up, then that helps to drive the price down too.
Like big screen TVs,
yes. They are so cheap now.
No, and I still don't have one. I think another trend will be towards an increased focus on indoor air quality. Certainly with COVID, people spending a lot more time working from home, or even those in offices and restaurants are thinking more about the health of the air that's being circulated. And there are many studies, not just related to COVID, but many studies which show a link between moisture and mold problems in buildings and poor respiratory health for the occupants. It can exacerbate, and some studies seem to indicate that it can cause the onset of asthma, pneumonia. Mold can cause just general fatigue, where you just seem like you have no energy. I mentioned my cough that would just last, for months. And I saw one study at a conference. It was a Building Performance Institute conference. Well, no, it was a remodeling conference, but the president at the time, I think he still is, but the president of the Building Performance Institute, I believe his name was Larry Zarker. He was giving a talk on how buildings affected health. And he cited one study that had been done where they took kids who were hospitalized for asthma or breathing problems. And then for 1,000 kids, they went back and inspected their homes to see what was the environment they were living in. And I know the number he cited was in the high 90s. If my memory serves, it was around 97% of those kids lived in homes that either had obvious mold, obvious moisture damage, or water damage. So for instance, maybe the basement had flooded and they dried it out. It would seem to indicate that there might be some things growing in those walls or that grew in those walls that are causing ongoing issues. One side note, dead mold spores. So a lot of people, if they get mold, they're like, well, I'll just kill it with bleach or whatever.
Right.
Dead mold spores can cause just as much respiratory irritation as living mold spores. They're just not viable to reproduce. So especially if you have any significant amount of mold, or if you're sensitive to it, you want to remove the mold through using true HEPA vacuum or something, and then treat it. And bleach is not a good thing to treat it with for a variety of reasons. Bleach is pretty caustic itself in terms of breathing it while you're cleaning. Bleach theoretically kills mold, but its effectiveness is reduced in the presence of biological materials, which, as we mentioned earlier, is
the mold needs to grow.
So there's some questions about how effective it is in the real world application.
Right.
And then thirdly, bleach, if it's not thoroughly rinsed, if how bleach has kind of a slimy feel.
Yes.
Bleach will leave a residue that once the bleach loses its potency, the mold actually can feed on. So,
oh my goodness.
It's kind of, so, there are some good products out there. There's Concrobium is a company that makes something called mold control that people may have seen at Lowe's or Home Depot, and that tends to be a good product, but you only want to use that if you have like a tiny bit of mold on a bathroom wall or something like that.
Right.
You don't want to deal with large mold problems. The most homeowners shouldn't try and tackle a large mold problem, or they might just exacerbate things.
Right. Yeah, I think that's really, really good advice. Is there anything else that you thought of while we were talking that you wanted to mention before we wrap up?
Nothing specific coming to mind.
Very good.
I enjoyed the conversation.
Yeah,
so
thank you. Yeah, thank you very much. How can our listeners contact you?
Sure. Our office phone number is 717-914-8155. If you call that number, you'll typically get Mike. He's our office assistant. And he can either help with scheduling or direct you to talk to myself or one of the other guys. Email is energyauditors@hotmail.com. So that's energy auditors, AUDITORS @hotmail.com. And our website is www.paenergyauditors.com. If you go to the website, you will have visited it roughly more than I have in the last 3 years. We've grown so fast by word of mouth and without direct marketing efforts that we didn't have much time to put into it. But there's some good information on there, and we are currently working to improve that. Our old website was energyauditors.biz, which now redirects to the .com.
To the .com. Okay.
But so yeah, look forward to trying to help people if they've got efficiency, comfort, or health problems.
Okay, well, very good. Thank you so much.
All right, thank you.
Thanks for listening to the Practical Preservation Podcast. The resources discussed during this episode are on our website at practicalpreservationservices.com/podcast. If you received value from this episode and know someone else that will get value from it as well, please share it with them. Join us next week for another episode of the Practical Preservation Podcast. For more information on restoring your historic home, visit practicalpreservationservices.com.